It was December 2018, and I had just returned from a 3-month trip in Bali, which was hair-raising at the best of times, and at the worst of times was terrifying. At some point, following the advice of an oracle set that I had purchased there, I created a circle of candles, walked clockwise in it 3 times, and announced to the universe that I was prepared for my shadow journey. And boy, did the universe reply. And I started with my own sense of a nightmare that was ongoing from my previous life in Washington, D.C., and you can hear more about that in the Oblivion series. And so I was struggling with that as well as the mystical shadow journey experience. And I went to a Christmas party, and while everybody was in the Christmas cheer spirit, I felt like a shell of a person because I was under such duress, living in such fear, trying to be normal. And I remember wearing this green cashmere sweater and jeans, and coming from Bali where I was wearing flowy clothes and telling myself I'm never going to wear jeans again. All of a sudden, I'm back in the United States, feeling as though I am embodying this person that isn't me. And at the party, which was a blur, I met a woman, and I think of her a lot when I think about the nightmare realms, because she is the person that first introduced me to them, in theory. She didn't take me to them or anything like that, but she also was suffering. And at first, we didn't really jive. And then after a couple of hours of being there, we started actually opening up to each other. And we both remarked about how the spiritual journey is so challenging because you have to go through it alone, and you go through some pretty intensely wild experiences. And this was before TikTok was really a thing, at least where I was at. And it's just a heartbreaking situation to feel that you are outgrowing your life, outgrowing your friends, your family, your customs, but you're not fully broken through the cocoon yet. And so you put on the sweater and the jeans and you go to the Christmas party and you make small talk, and meanwhile you're inside dying. She was dying too. And we remarked about how we really needed a spiritual integration center because there was nothing like that at that time point. And she and I talked about maybe setting one up in the future because it's so needed. Like when you're on the journey and you start to lose your mind, you need a safe place to go to where you can just ground. Somebody can bring you meals. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can like do your work in your own little cabin, and somebody just caters to your needs and then helps to ground you and bring you into your material existence if that's where you're at. And sometimes you need to be very floaty, and especially like when you start quantum traveling and you're doing like really big shifts, then having food magically appear and not having to engage in normal everyday conversation is a really great tool to help you shift, because having to go out to the grocery store or the post office or to take care of errands is really a downer. And I have a theory that it actually holds you back sometimes, because those moments of routine actually pull you into reality layers, but that's just a working theory I'll talk about later. And so her and I talked about this vision that we had of having a spiritual integration center to where people could go on the journey, lose their minds, but have people nearby to help them integrate the experience and to reemerge. And she was the only one that I exchanged numbers with, or not the only one. There was somebody else I met too, but it didn't go anywhere. We met for coffee and lunch a couple times, but they were super toxic, super toxic. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm sorry. But her and I met up for coffee. It was like a week later, and she confided in me even more about her experience. And as it just so happened, she was further along in her shadow journey than I was. And so the story that she told me was mind-blowing, but the way that she told it to me, I believed every moment of it, even though I couldn't personally relate. She was the first person that would educate me on the experience of slipping into a nightmare realm. And it starts off where she was driving her car, and I'm sure there's lots of things that she didn't tell me. She was married at the time, she had kids, and she was driving her car, and I'm sure she was already under some sort of experience duress, because what she started the story with was that she was listening to the radio, and then the radio started changing and talking to her. Like, I've had sound change too, and others as well have talked about this, but her experience was very specific in that the radio station, it was like the normal commercials, actually like blipped out and then started communicating with her in a very negative, and she didn't exactly say how, but I got the impression that she was terrified and that it was like this moment of what is going on. And she noticed that where she had been driving, and I haven't told her story before and I haven't recalled it in a while. So if she was here telling it, there might be some details that are different. I'm just going off of my memory of hearing it one time years ago. So she was on a quest to buy an inflatable pool. And so she was trying to go to a Walmart, and she was trying to go to a familiar Walmart that she was familiar with, but it was like she slipped into a different dimension where everything started looking different. And then the Walmart that she went to was not the familiar Walmart. It had like no people in there, which in the South, you know how this is like not possible, right? Any hour that a Walmart is open, it is packed full of people. It was like desolate. And instead of having this sign be normal, remember we've talked about signs as a KPI before, she saw something wild. She saw a hand-painted wooden sign that had black paint that said Walmart on it. And she walked into the store and half the shelves were empty. And so she ended up finding an inflatable pool and then purchasing it. But her entire experience there was incredibly frightening because she felt very disoriented. I got the sensation from her that she was under heavy duress and that this was really a mindfuck for her, and almost like an intentional mindfuck. And I have been in a nightmare place where people have telepathically told me it was like the Hunger Games and the Matrix, and then changed the map and changed the location of my hotel or changed the roads. They didn't seem to have the power that they had over her, assuming that she was interfacing with a similar type of team that had advanced technology. I perceived it to be an interdimensional team rather than a human-led team in a reality layer that we're all familiar with. And there's reasons that I feel that way, but It's just an opinion. I don't know. And I don't know about her experience. But now, having had my experience and remembering her telling the story, the way that she was carrying tension in her body, the way her voice was shaking, the way her eyes were sort of like, and she was a normal spiritual person. This was something that I perceived to be out of character. This was hard for her to share with me. And I could see that it wasn't like, hey, I reality shifted and then I ended up in this place that I had to. It was like, I don't know what happened to me, but I ended up in a post-apocalyptic zone. That's the way she described it. I ended up in a apocalypse zone, and everything was frightening, and the feeling that she had intuitively was that she was in danger, and things were out of order, out of place. And so anyway, so she completed her sale and took the brand new inflatable pool back home, and it had a massive hole in it or something. It was so messed up, right? But her story continued, and I don't know if she shifted back into a normal layer after that. Now I would ask her different questions. I just received her story, and I just let her tell me whatever she wanted to tell me. And so the next thing that she told me was that the way she perceived her husband started changing, where it was almost like he had a demon in him, and the man that she knew and had come to love was gone. And then he started treating her horribly and ended up institutionalizing her. And when she had this like clearest image that she painted for me, where she was being locked up and taken away and bewildered, she felt so betrayed because he tricked her and got her hospitalized. And she looked at him as he was leaving, and he looked at her with this sinister, that's how she described it. It was maybe not verbatim, but this image of this demon-like figure over the body of her husband, embodying his face. You know how there people talk about shapeshifters, and shamans also have this ability too, where if you look at a shaman's face in the middle of a psychedelic ceremony, you might see different versions of the shaman. I saw this with my ayahuasca shaman in Costa Rica. And there are some people that have this sight to where they can look beyond the human form and see entity attachments in other people. And she had this ability that was emerging. And so in addition to her husband being quote unquote possessed, she saw her child being taken over. She saw her neighbors. And then she had a story about her neighbors being abusive to a dog and just like horrific things. So she felt like she was in a nightmare. And she felt like she had nowhere to turn. And she was trying to integrate the experience. And so that is one version that she told me. I have lost touch with her actually. And we had a mutual friend who has reached out over the years and asked me to check on this woman because she knew that we weren't close in terms of the time we spent together, but in the soul to soul connection, we felt like we knew each other. And so this other friend knew that, and so she would ask me to check on her in the astral plane to make sure she was okay, because she would just randomly disappear. And the last time she disappeared, and I haven't checked to know if she's returned, but she left her house suddenly, and she left like all of her belongings. Her cell phone was found in like a neighbor's yard. There was a black cross painted on one of her bathroom mirrors upside down, and nobody could find her. And we didn't know what happened to her. And I've actually tried reaching out to her a couple of times, and I received no reply. And it's like her social media profiles are dead. I have no idea if she is alive, if she's in a different dimension. I've I have no clue, but I have checked on her in the astral realm, and I perceive that she is okay. And I have asked the mutual friend if she has heard from her, and she says no. So it's a question mark. Some other people describe nightmare realms as slipping into a place where there's more violence, where there's more abuse, where it's like living in a horror movie, but your life kind of continues the same. And so on the surface, it's hard to really pinpoint, but some of these dimensions feel like nature herself or himself is different, is angrier, is more oppressive, like the air will feel heavier. It will be harder to breathe there. Sometimes the cicadas, I've heard them, they sound so mean. They sound evil. Like it's just really peculiar. The mosquitoes will be insanely aggressive, and the light will change. Sometimes it's more of a blue tone. That's my personal opinion. Or it'll seem to get dark earlier. It'll just have like this vampiric feel. And then you'll have problems with people who are like vampire-like connections or energy siphoning connections. People talk about sometimes at night feeling like there are entities or some other being that they can't see with their eyes present, that are doing things to them, that are siphoning their energy. Sometimes they describe it as psychic attacks. I have also experienced my body being taken over, and it felt like things were being done to it in another realm. Like I remember my mind tried to piece together what was happening. It felt like it was being tortured, mutilated, and sometimes worse. And then sometimes people have telepathic communications with abusive people, human operators that seem to be nearby, that will tell them like their worst nightmare is coming true. And then other people have their perceptual systems messed with. Like there's mind control technology, advanced mind control technology, to where their bodies feel like they are being controlled or modified by somebody else. This also is called remote neural monitoring sometimes, which is weird. Seemingly whenever I use that tag on TikTok, my stuff gets shadow banned. I can't figure it out. It seems odd to me. So other people talk about their dreams being invaded, and there's a variety of different ways that this can manifest. But it's like everything that you do, like you could have the best intentions, and the outcomes seem to always be leading to something horrible. Or you're under this attack that you can't share with anybody else because you live in a world that is predominantly binary, or they don't know about this technology, or they don't know about these other things that exist. And so you have no way to get help. Isn't that brilliant if you were really in a malevolent type of society, to make sure that you couldn't search it? Isn't that just like so evil? Because then nobody would believe you. If it's not a thing on Google, it's not a thing, right? Google has nothing to do with it, but you know what I mean? It's like, if it's not talked about in mainstream culture, if it's not validated by science, by medicine, if it's not an SEO tag, then it doesn't exist in most people's eyes. And so if you have an experience that is out of the ordinary and you have no framework to communicate about it, and this experience happens to be very abusive and out of your control and not a figment of your imagination. Like, for example, I've talked to several people that have been in nightmare realms with this advanced technology, and one common thing is that they will have impossible listeners upstairs. Like, they'll hear footsteps, they will hear people, they will sense people, their animals, their pets will sense people. Like, the dogs will bark, the dogs will feel, like, dogs are powerful energy sensors. And I learned this on the journey, and they are such great detectors. And so it's not a figment of your imagination when your dog starts looking up at the ceiling and starts growling. At the same time, you're like, wait a second, somebody in my attic? Wait a second, I don't have an upstairs. Right? How is that possible? Well, it is possible if there's some interdimensional technology, or if our senses are being modified and fucked with. But because this isn't a thing that we can talk about and conceptualize very easily, then who do you call? Ghostbusters? I mean, that was like in the 80s, right? Who do you call today? You see what I mean? And so it creates this barrier, which is really a sophisticated plot twist. If you were actually the holders of some of this advanced technology, making sure that people couldn't get help is the perfect cover. Other people are gang stalked, and so they are harassed in their environment. Some people have a combination of both. Some believe that they're related. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And so there are people that are hired to follow others incessantly to essentially drive them crazy. And it's very effective. I remember meeting a PI and talking to him about this issue. It was like, I'm being followed. And you can hear more about this in my Oblivion series. And he was like, yeah, that's what they do. That they hire people. They hire just random people. Sometimes it's like drug people off the street that are just trying to make a quick buck. They don't care who you are. And then they just tag team to make you feel the pressure, this incessant pressure. And it's a technique that is very effective for taking you out of society because it is extremely stressful. And that's what the PI said. He said, this is their intent. They're not trying to kill you. If they were actually trying to kill you, they would just try to kill you. And I was like, I feel like I'm threatened sometimes. Anyway, so he said that they disable and neutralize people by effectively making them go crazy. And what we know, what I have observed working with clients that are trying to exit that nightmare, is that this has a profound effect on the brain and the ability of the brain's power to process information effectively. And it has some peculiar effects that I have to work with people one-on-one to help them through, because it's like being in PTSD all day long for an extended period of time. And that prolonged acute stress creates this hypervigilance and overgeneralization where everything is about their situation. And then the interpreter part of the brain goes wild and starts to create these narratives, which then creates realities for these to play out. So it ends up actually supporting the nightmare, because then it feeds back into itself from a psychological perspective. So most people who are in a nightmare know that they're in a nightmare. I am not talking about having some hardships and obstacles in life or being tethered to a society that is going down the drain. That's different. That can happen in everyday realities, and it happens for good reasons. And some of the nightmare experiences are very, like, you feel them. Like, your body feels it. And you just feel that you're waking up or you're going to a place that just feels wrong. Like, I remember when I first started deducing that there were different reality layers, I started understanding how to differentiate the ones that were frightening. We are built for survival, right? And so I started really paying attention to the details. And one of the key things is how still everything felt. Sometimes it felt like I was actually in a dome. And then the flat earthers will say, yeah, I know, we're in a dome. And I'm like, you don't want to be in a dome. If you're in a dome world, most of those are not friendly. Like, just saying. I personally recommend shifting away from the dome worlds. They do exist. And not all of them, but there were some security issues and some of them were taken over. And it's kind of like being in, oh man, my mind is going in a couple different places that I want to share with you, but I have to wrap up soon. It's kind of like being in a version of the United States that feels like it's not actually run with the principles of the United States. Like, it almost feels like the government itself is a completely different government with different ideals, because the way that the system is run suddenly starts to feel very, very frightening. And you're like, wait a second, I thought this was America. America, where'd you go? And it's this really perverse feeling, like talking to law enforcement and feeling as though they're not on your side. They're, it's weird. It's a really weird situation. And sometimes, especially the dome places, will feel very still, like the plants have this quality to them where they almost look artificial. But if you go up to touch them, then they're not like silk plants or anything, but they don't feel right. And the air feels heavier and it feels more stale. And you might not have felt it rain for a while, or you might not have seen the sun for a while, and you can't exactly remember when, but you just know that the weather is a little off. And your body doesn't feel good, like the food that you're eating, the water that you're drinking, like it feels like there's something wrong, but nobody has told you that there's something wrong. And in one of those places, I was like, I am going to investigate this and explore and see. So I went exploring and I tried a couple of different techniques. I don't have time to go into them right now and it doesn't feel appropriate. But I just saw, like, what type of people can I pull towards me? What type of businesses are there? What does it feel like? And so I found that the affluence level felt very different, even though I was in my neighborhood. It was like all of a sudden the cars were really old and it looked like they wouldn't pass an emissions test. Whereas before it was like everybody was kind of driving new cars. And I swear it seemed like the buildings were older too. So it's just this feeling. That's why you have to be like really in tune with your intuition. And then you pair that with extrasensory phenomenon, which depending on where you're coming from may not exist. But you have these heightened senses that you're able to detect that there are threats that your quote unquote normal eyes can't see. but you can still feel, you can hear, like or you can smell. There was one in particular, this was like Matrix level wars that was being hidden from the public. And so people were living in a multi-matrix arrangement, but they weren't aware of it because it wasn't publicized. And I don't have any more information about how that came to be or why that was. But there were matrices that were being taken over by others, and sort of like foreign government invasions. And they would come in and then they would take over this upper level system of society, but it would be under the radar. And so everybody would be living their normal lives, but then you would smell the stench of burning, or like sometimes it smelled like chemicals, where other times it smelled like death. Like it smelled like there were mass casualties. But when you looked outside, it was like just a normal Vegas. Just like people, nobody was winning at the casino that I was at, which was kind of unusual. It had this really kind of grimy feel, and it wasn't a low-end casino. I think, which one was that? I can't remember. It was like a middle tier one. But the Vegas that I remembered before I started reality shifting, it was like people were having fun, and you could hear machines going off or people at the craps table winning. People would be smiling, and there would be this jubilant feeling, this joyful feeling. And at this point, it had a grimy feel, and nobody was smiling and nobody was winning. Like I started paying attention because I was like, what are people doing here? It was so bizarre. And then I could smell these wafting smells, but when you looked outside, everything looked normal. And I wasn't the only one who could smell it. There was this woman who we got on the elevator together, and it smelled like death. It smelled like there were bodies somewhere. And she even brought it up like, what's that smell? And the price gouging was insane. I mean, the prices there were just absolutely ludicrous for this little tiny, horrible gas station sandwich. It was something like $7 or $8 when it would normally be like $2. And the gas prices are another good KPI, and general commodities are also a great KPI. And so when you look at inflation and you look at what you can buy for your money, and then you look at the feel of people, you can start to see if there's something wrong at a society level. And I remember at that particular hotel, after feeling like there was some sort of shielding technology, I felt this way before, that there was some augmented reality technology or some way to keep up the face of a place. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they were covering up a war. And I remember when I shifted into a place like that, I changed hotel rooms. I was in the same hotel on the same floor, but I changed rooms. So I checked out and checked back in, and just had a completely different booking. And I went to the sink and I saw what looked like, and I saw a photo of this hair and ash and bone in the water. And same in the toilet water, like there was debris in there. And you pair that with the scent of death, and it smelled like this chemical dissolving. Something was off there, right? Something was way, way off. And I can't tell you why I felt that way, except that it didn't feel kosher. I mean, I guess I did tell you the reasons, the highlights, but what I'm talking about is this matrix level takeover. switching hands and shifting everybody into a nightmare, but on the surface, keeping everything sort of okay through the use of this secret advanced technology. And so all of this destruction was pretty much being hidden. And everybody's like, business is normal, but just pay us like 3 times the price for worse value. And then in another place, there was advanced cloning technology where people could shift their consciousness into, and that was highly sought after for nefarious reasons and capitalized on. And clones were not seen as humans because those people did not respect sentience, and they just saw like, oh, it's not a real human, and so then the way that they were treated was horrific, even though there were highly sentient, intelligent, and conscious beings inhabiting clone form. And so that one was pretty grim as well, and for a variety of different reasons. And so there are different places that you can travel through that you can learn about. I call it interrogation because it is a process of having to ascertain where you're at by interrogating the environment passively and actively, and by understanding which narratives are internally generated and externally generated. And this is something that I work with my coaching clients on. For reality shifting. It's an advanced topic that I'm not going to be able to cover in YouTube because it requires so much nuance to work through and to help people through, that right now I'm only offering it as part of my one-on-one coaching. And so there are more reality layers, but pretty much if you're living a normal life and you're trying to reality shift, because I've gotten a couple of questions about the nightmare realms. And thank you for such great questions, by the way. I really appreciate you guys, gals, and the non-binary friends who are listeners. And so you will know, because you will have some pretty wild experiences that you feel like you can't talk about, or you're going to feel oppressed, or you're going to be stalked, you're going to be terrorized, you're going to feel unsafe, you're going to feel haunted, you're going to feel like there are unexplainable, horrific things happening to you that you don't have a way to really get help with. And so I love working with people like that, but it's really hard work. It's actually really, really challenging. And sometimes the psyche of the people are really delicate that we can't do the work. And it takes you being at a certain point of readiness to exit the nightmare. And that's why I've talked about that before. And so that's why I have to decline a lot of people that come to me for the nightmare coaching. I'd say maybe 2 out of 10 people, 20% of people pass the screening for it. And so it's really a process. It's really an investment. If you're just trying to reality shift to explore, then you don't have to worry about that so much. Then just be in touch with your intuition and your body and anchor into your preferred reality layer. And if you need help with that, then I'm happy to help you with that. But you're welcome to just follow along and to learn as we go. So with that, if you are interested in coaching or if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com. Okay, we'll talk soon.